Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Water Commission. It's Thursday, November 18th, 2021. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call of the commissioners. I have a roll call here, Madam Clerk.
Yes. Commissioner Keller is not here. Commissioner Kammeier?
Here.
Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Vice Chair Young?
Here.
And Chair Davis?
Here. So we will move then to item 3 on our agenda, which is changes to the agenda. Staff, do we have any changes to today's agenda?
Chair Davis, there are no changes to the agenda, but it is a full agenda, so we'll do our best to stay on schedule.
And I will make sure you do that. You bet. Okay. Consent items. We have only one item. That's the meeting. Can't get out. It's early in the morning. Meeting minutes for our meeting of October 21st, 2021. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes? Not seeing any. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
You do. I'll move to adopt the consent calendar.
Commissioner Young made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Cooney seconded it. Madam Chair, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, we have Young and Cooney. Commissioner Keller, still not present. Commissioner Kammeier?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney?
Yes.
Vice Chair Young?
Yes.
And Chair Davis?
Yes, so the consent calendar is approved on a 4-0 with one absent vote. Takes us to our first administrative item. Item A is the water supply update. Staff, Mr. Hagmark, you want to kick this off, and where's Ms. Corey going to jump right in? Go ahead. Ms. Corey, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Good morning, Chair Davis and Water Commissioners. My name is Dakota Corey, and I'm the Water Supply Analyst for the city. And I will be providing our fall water supply update. We typically do this update at the start of the new water year, which was October 1st. And as always, it's an interesting update. So let's just get started. Next slide, please. So a quick outline of my presentation. We'll look at the statewide and local drought status. We will look at the city's demand status paired with our water supply status. And when you put demand and water supply together, that leads us to a water supply strategy moving forward. Next slide. So first, we'll look at our statewide and local drought status. Next slide. So this is a graph that comes from the county. It has local precipitation back to the year 1980. The red dashed line represents average rainfall, and any green bars represent above average rainfall, while blue bars represent average rainfall and brown bars represent below average rainfall. If we focus on the lower right-hand corner of the graph, you can see that we have experienced a historic drought starting in 2012. We did have a couple above average and average rainy years mixed in there towards the end in 2017. 2019 and 2020. And now we're looking at 2022, and you can see that we've registered a little bit of rainfall there. We had the one storm at the end of October, which actually brought us to 11% of annual average rainfall at Gibraltar, 9% at Kachuma, and 9% in Santa Barbara. That was an early storm for us, so that was a good start. I'm hoping that we'll see more, but the predictions aren't in our favor that way. Next slide, please. This is a graphic from the U.S. Drought Monitor. And as you can see, there's drought conditions all across the state of California, ranging from moderate drought all the way to an exceptional drought. And whenever I show the Drought Monitor graphic, I want to talk a little bit about what goes into it. So this is based on physical conditions in California. So we're looking at things like soil moisture, stream flow, precipitation. And so those are all measurable physical characteristics of the environment that can lead us to deduce what type of drought we're in. The thing that this drought monitor does not include is the water supply status at each individual water agency. And so the takeaway message here is that conditions are very dry across the state. And as we know, the governor has declared a statewide drought emergency for California this year. But that's not the complete story. And so what I hope to show here today is, with this background of definitely experiencing a significant drought condition statewide, what does the city's water supply picture look like within that climate? And I do want to mention too that in your water resources managers packet, we have the 3-month predictions from NOAA on both precipitation and rainfall. And NOAA is predicting below average rainfall and above average temperatures for our region through the winter, which is typically our rainy season. Next slide, please. So now let's look at city demands. Next slide. This is a graphic that shows demands from 3 different years. The gray line represents demands in 2013, which we've used for several years now to define our pre-drought baseline. And then the light blue line represents demands in 2020, and the dark blue line represents demands in 2021. Now, as you know, we recently adopted our enhanced urban water management plan, and that kind of reset our new normal for what we expect for water demands moving forward. The takeaway from this graphic is you can see that demands in 2020 and demands in 2021 are significantly reduced, lost the presentation, from 2013 demands. Just pausing here for a second. I'm not seeing the presentation anymore. There it is. Excellent, thank you. We're seeing 22% conservation in 2021 compared to the 2013 baseline. Now, there's conversation going on at the state level about resetting that baseline to 2020. And that's why I included both 2020 and 2021 here. You can see that our demands have dropped primarily in the month of October in 2021 compared to 2020. So we're at about 11% less demand in 2021 than in 2020 if we start looking at demands in July, which is when the state started tracking them. And I'm going to further this conversation later in the presentation in terms of what that all means for water supply planning. But the takeaway message here is that we have seen a consistent reduction in demand since pre-drought demands of 2013. And we are seeing some reduction in demand compared to 2020 currently. Next slide, please. And this is another way to look at demand. This is our total production to date. So this is both the potable water system and the recycled water system. The black line represents, the solid black line represents demand back to 1985. And you can see the previous drought that happened in the late 80s, early 90s, you see demand dropped off precipitously. It slowly recovered over several years, but it never recovered all the way back to pre-drought demands. And then you can see the next drought that we've experienced more recently in the 2012 to 2018 time period. So we see demand drop off again. And we are seeing it start to creep back up. The blue line in this graph represents our projected demands from our enhanced urban water management plan moving forward. And what you see here is that we are expecting demands to increase. So we'll expect a rebound from our last drought demands. We're also adding on there the water that we supply to Montecito Water District beginning in January 2022. And the takeaway from this slide is that our projected demands and actual demands are tracking very closely moving forward. Commissioner Keller, did you have a question?
Yes, quick question. You mentioned when you showed the blue line that we're expecting that, but I think it's more we're planning for it, not that we expect people to actually consume more. No? So they may or may not. We hope they don't, but we are planning in case they do consume more water. No?
That's a good point. So yeah, the blue line represents planning numbers from our enhanced urban water management plan. And we did explore a number of scenarios in terms of what water consumption behavior might look like after the drought. So this is our baseline, and we'll be tracking it to see how people actually consume water versus our planned numbers. But right now they're tracking very closely. Good point.
Thank you.
Next slide. So now let's look at the status of our water supplies. Next slide. As you know, the city has one of the most diverse water supply portfolios in the state. We have a multitude of different water supplies, and all that combination of different water supplies allows us to be nimble and flexible as we respond to different hydrologic conditions. For this water supply update, I'm going to go through each of our supplies individually and give you their current status. So starting with Gibraltar Reservoir, which is a city-owned and operated reservoir on the San Ynez River. It's located upstream of Lake Cachuma. Currently, storage is at 4% capacity, or 198 acre-feet. The way that we use Gibraltar, it fills and spills under normal rainfall conditions. And so when it's full, it's to our advantage to use that water to meet our water supply needs and to lower the level in the reservoir again so that it's ready to capture rain for the next rainy season. And that's exactly where we're at right now. So it's, basically empty, but it is ready to go in case we get any more storms this winter to capture that rainfall for future use. We did last divert from Gibraltar in January 2021, and our total water use in water year 21 from Gibraltar was 1,222 acre-feet. The utilization of water from Gibraltar allows us to increase our storage in Cachuma because we can use Gibraltar water instead of Cachuma water. Next slide, please. Cachuma Reservoir is our largest source of surface water for the city. It captures water on the San Ynez River. Storage at Gibraltar right now is currently at 92,688 acre-feet. That's about 48% of capacity. Now, Cachuma is a shared resource, so the city's stored supply in Lake Cachuma is around 25,500 acre-feet, which is a significant amount of water. That represents about 2.5 years of the city's total annual demand moving forward. So to break those numbers down, we get an allocation each year on Lake Cachuma. This year, our allocation, so for water year 2022, which began in October 21, our allocation was 70%, which is about 5,800 acre-feet. And we have 19,700 acre-feet stored in carryover water. Mr. Hagmark?
Yeah, I just wanted, of course, the commission follows this closely, but this is a significant chunk of water sitting in Cachuma, and it is the product of water conservation and desal production. And I just want to make it very clear, we are sitting, look, with almost 25% of the water that sits in Cachuma belongs to the city, which is unheard of. And it's the direct product of those two supplies, which we'll continue to talk more about. But we really are leveraging, all of our supplies, and has put us in a really good position right now.
Question, Commissioner Kamara?
Yes, I was just wondering, and I'm not sure we want to get into this now, but I was wondering if there's any updates on the Cachuma kind of shared resource situation with allocations for next year and also with carryover water. I think what I understood from last meeting is that there are some potential conflicts around that.
So the allocation is set at 70% for water year 2022. And currently our water supply contract for Cachuma allows us to carry over water. Where the potential threat lies is that we will be entering into negotiations for an update to our water supply contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. And the Bureau has made it pretty clear that they are concerned with the amount of carryover water that is in the lake and that they would like to change those policies. I don't know if Mr. Hagmark has something else to add.
Yeah, I was just say, Commissioner Kamara, I am planning to bring that up under the Water Resources Managers Update, because we did have, since the commission last met, we did have some additional discussion with the chair, vice chair, and liaisons to the Water Commission. And so I'll bring that up during the Water Resources Manager report, because I think we want maybe a different approach to dealing with the county on this. But
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, and we can move on to the next slide. So another source that the city has available to it is water from the State Water Project, which originates in Northern California and is transported all the way to Southern California via the California Aqueduct, which is a picture of here on the slide. The city has a table A amount of State Water Project water of 3,300 acre-feet. That means that's the maximum amount of water that we have available to us under our contract with the State Water Project. Then each year, the California Department of Water Resources looks at the system as a whole and makes a determination on what percentage of each agency's allocation they're going to have available to them. This year, that was 5%, which is tied for the lowest allocation ever on the State Water Project, also with the year 2014. So what that means for the city is we got 165 acre feet of water off the State Water Project this year. There's an expectation that even with normal rainfall, there'll be a 0% allocation on the State Water Project next year. And that's because the state is so dry and the system has been so depleted this year that even with normal rainfall, there's a lot of holes to fill before they can start allocating water on the project again. So in terms of our water supply planning, which you'll see in the future, we don't have any plans to use state water through 2024. It's just not a source that we're counting on. And we do still have some water debt related to the State Water Project from the previous drought. It's 2,000 acre feet, and we keep that on our radar. We plan to pay that back when there's a healthier allocation that we can pay that back with. And it looks like we've got some questions or comments from Chair Davis.
Just a quick question. I'm just curious is there any update on what's happening with the state's supply, given the amount of rainfall that Northern California has undergone the last month or two?
I haven't heard anything really in relation to the storms that they're seeing up north. My understanding from our representatives at the Central Coast Water Authority is even if we do see significant rainfall on the project this year, there's so many holes to fill. For example, the federal government didn't get to take any water from the project this year, even though they're a partner in that project, that we'll probably still see a low to no allocation next year.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I also just wanted to add to it, this doesn't mean we won't be looking for water. We will be looking to see if there's any water available for sale, but we're just planning as though we won't be able to secure any additional water.
Commissioner Young, do you have a question?
I do. Do we keep track, like a running average of what our cost is for an acre foot of water based on these different sources?
We do. I don't have that number at my fingertips right now, and the State Water Project is probably the most variable because that allocation changes from year to year, but we have a lot of fixed costs associated with that supply. That's definitely information we can provide you, though.
Yeah, you know what? Why don't we bring that back on another agenda? Because I think it'd be good information for all the commissions. So that's a good point, Jeff, and thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, I'd like to see that, and it'd be interesting. And then if you're kind of computing what the average cost is over a period of time, and if you have a curve to that, I think that would be really informative. Thank you.
Sure. And Commissioner
Kammeyer,
Kammeyer, did you also have a question?
I just wanted to second Commissioner Young's request. I think that would be great to see, and I would love to see conservation on that list.
Okay, yeah, we actually consider conservation as one of our supplies, and we evaluate our programs based on the cost of our other supplies. So that will be discussed in our next presentation a little bit, but we can probably go into more detail in the future.
Thank you.
Sure. Next slide, please. Desalination is another critical part of the city's water supply portfolio. In water year 21, it represented 18% of our total demand. And as you know, City Council changed our policy around how we use desalination as part of our water supply portfolio in February of this year. And desal represents an important role in drought preparation, response, and recovery. And so the idea here is that as we use desal as a fairly consistent supply, especially if our other supplies are stressed, it allows us to preserve our Cachuma water as carryover in Lake Cachuma, as Mr. Hagmark described earlier. And that really allows us to stretch our supplies as we head into a drought or as we're recovering from a drought. Next slide, please. This is a map of our groundwater basins. The city has 3 primary groundwater basins. The Santa Barbara Basin is, let's see, just looking at the map real quick, I'm sorry. The storage unit 1 is outlined in yellow and red, and that's our larger basin that is located primarily under the downtown area of the city. We also have storage unit 3, which is located to the southwest of storage unit 1. The water quality in storage unit 3 isn't fantastic, and so we use that to supplement our recycled water system. And then we also have the Foothill Basin, which is in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, surrounded by a red outline. And so that's located in our foothills and sort of the upper State Street area of the city. If we go to the next slide, I can give you a status on our groundwater supplies. So we continue to monitor our groundwater for sea level intrusion and water level. So in the Foothill Basin, when we pump that basin, our main concern is how low the water levels get. And in the storage unit 1 basin, our concern is with seawater intrusion. So as we pump fresh water out of that basin, we can pull seawater from the coast inward into our basins. And so that's something that we continue to monitor. The levels are low and intrusion remains at the coast, similar to the early 1990s. And this is because we pumped the basins pretty hard from 2016 to 2018 in response to previous drought conditions. Currently, we're resting our groundwater basins with some scheduled well maintenance so that our wells are functioning properly and ready to come back online as needed. Full recovery of the basins is expected to take 5 to 10 years. And that's based on our previous experience from past droughts. We do still have water in storage in our groundwater basins if we need it, if we're going into future dry years. And we are currently piloting a injection study, an ASR injection study at our San Roque well, where we could potentially do artificial recharge of excess supplies to fill up our Foothill Basin when we have surplus supplies available. Commissioner Young.
That was my question, the injection sites. So is it going to be one site or two? And are we thinking of enhancing the ability of the soils to infiltrate water?
So currently we're doing a pilot project and we have permitting from the State Water Resources Control Board to do that. And we're doing it at one well, which is our San Roque well in the Foothill Basin. That my understanding is that the rehabilitation of that well and getting it ready for the project has been completed, and we'll actually start the injection piloting early in 2022. And then in terms of increasing infiltration, our groundwater basins haven't seen any compaction or secession from groundwater pumping. So I think they're ready to receive water. We just have to sort of understand how the hydraulics work in terms of putting that water in the ground and how it moves around and what we can do with our wells themselves.
Do we have other potential sites to inject surplus surface water?
I believe we do have other wells that have injection capability. I'm not sure if Mr. Hagmark can provide additional information on that.
Yes, Vice Chair Young, we do have other sites. Right now, most of those sites are in the downtown storage unit 1. So anytime we're drilling new wells now, we're making them ASR capable. But we haven't drilled a new well in the Foothill Basin in quite some time. Actually, the San Roque well was the last one that was drilled. So we'll be looking, as we look to replace wells in the San Roque Basin, we'll be looking to make those ASR wells in the future.
Great. Thank you.
And Commissioner Kamaya?
Yeah, just a quick question, forgive me for not knowing this, but where do these basins stand under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act?
That's a really good question. So the basins are characterized as very low priority, which means that we're not required to form a sustainable groundwater agency or prepare a sustainable groundwater management plan. With that said, it was an outcome of our enhanced urban water management plan to at least prepare a GSP, a groundwater sustainability plan light, so that we can actively manage our basins. And the reason that they were classified as very low priority was because of their size and their output. They're just so small that they don't really register. They're not in overdraft. They're being managed sustainably. And we hope to have a plan to make that more of a transparent process moving forward.
Thank you.
Sure. And we can move on to the next slide. So recycled water is another component of our water supply portfolio. It is an important supply in that it offsets the use of potable water that can be used on large landscapes for irrigation. And our plant is currently operating and meeting customer demands. We are going to be undertaking an updated market assessment and cost benefit analysis to look for any additional customers that would be cost effective to connect to our recycled water system with a kickoff of early 2022. The RFP is actually out, and I'm expecting proposals back tomorrow on that. The system is pretty well utilized, especially in peak demand months, but we're hoping that we can find a few more cost-effective customers to fully utilize that resource. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we've looked a little bit at our water demand, and we've looked pretty in detail at our current water supplies. If we put supply and demand together, we can come up with a water supply strategy. Next slide, please. And every time that we update this water supply outlook, we look out 3 years. And so this particular analysis looked out to the end of water year 2024. So that would end in September 2024. And it's always a very conservative approach. And so the question that I'm trying to answer when I complete this analysis is, if we're to experience 3 more dry years, do we have enough supplies to meet demands? And so again, this comes from a very conservative place of planning, but really with California's really flashy precipitation patterns and variable water availability, that's the way that we need to plan to make sure that we're being the best stewards of our resources for our customers. So this slide outlines some of the assumptions that went into the water supply outlook. We started with demands as provided in our enhanced urban water management plan, which includes the provision of water under the water sales agreement for Montecito Water District beginning in January 2022. We do have the 70% allocation on Lake Cachuma for water year 2022, since that's been determined by the Bureau. But from there on, we assume, again, for conservative purposes, no new inflows to both Cachuma or Gibraltar. So we see a 0% allocation on Cachuma for water years 23 and 24, the water available in Gibraltar for 22 through 24, and also a 0% allocation on the State Water Project for 2022, which we discussed earlier. And moving forward with the State Water Project, I still wanted to be really conservative. So I assumed that we had enough allocation to meet our exchange agreement in water years 23 and 24, but nothing for additional city use. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the exchange agreement, it's somewhat complicated, but a quick explanation is we exchange our State Water Project water with Santa Ynez Water Conservation District ID1 in exchange for water stored in Cachuma. So essentially we turn our State Water Project water into Cachuma water. And so we assume that we'll be able to meet those requirements for the next 3 years. We're looking at desal production of 70% and sort of regular mission tunnel infiltration of 520 acre feet per year. Next slide. Now this gets into a little bit more of the decisions that we start to make as we start to meet those demands out into water year 2024. So I did initiate some groundwater pumping beginning in August 2022. That's 100 acre feet per month from storage unit 1, and then moving up to 145 acre feet per month from storage unit 1 beginning in July 2023. This makes an assumption that we can connect our Alameda well to the Ortega groundwater treatment plant with that project beginning in May 2022. And that is a project that has been designed and would just need to go out for construction. We also look at 70 acre feet per month of pumping from the Foothill Basin beginning in August 2022, and then 15% conservation beginning in May 2022. And 20% mandatory conservation beginning in May 23 through the end of water year 24. So before I show you what this looks like visually, the idea here is that we look at our demands out 3 years and we start plugging in our available supplies to meet those demands. And what I found when I first did this effort is that we were fine for water years 22 and 23, but we started to see shortages towards the end of water year 24. with our current available supplies and all these very conservative assumptions. And so that's when I started turning on groundwater wells and then looking at what type of conservation we would need to stretch those supplies through water year 24 and into water year 2025. Again, these are really conservative assumptions, and we need to be conservative in our planning. But we're also looking at a time period of over 3 rainy seasons. And as we know, the weather in California can be really flashy. And so we could have 3 more very dry rainy seasons, or we could have some wet years that kind of change all of this. So from that perspective, if we go to the next slide. This is the resulting graph, and there's kind of a lot going on here, so let me walk you through it. We're looking at water supplies from 2012, which was kind of the start of the last drought, through water year 2024. So the last 3 years, 22 through 24 are projections, 2012 through 2021 are actuals. And each color in the bar represents the source of the water supply that met those water demands. And so it's an interesting graph to see how we manage our supplies through a drought. You can see in 2012 through 2014, we had a lot of Cachuma water and Gibraltar water still available to us. And so those were our primary sources. As the drought continued and our surface water supply started to dry up, we relied on other sources, including water from the State Water Project, supplemental purchases, and groundwater. And then desal came online. It actually comes online in 2017. You can kind of see a small little bar there, but it came online fully in 2018. And so it becomes a significant piece of the picture moving forward as we transition through the drought. And then finally, looking into the future, we do have all of those supplies stored in Cachuma. I mentioned that we've got about 2.5 years of total demand supplied in Cachuma. So we look to rely on that moving into the future. We'll continue to use desal as a drought preparedness, response, and recovery supply. So it's a significant part of the portfolio. And then, as I explained in the last slide, we would potentially start turning on our groundwater wells in the spring of 2022. One thing more to mention, and then I'm happy to take your question, Commissioner Young, is that the height of these bars represent demand. And so you can see in water year 21 and 22, the demand is about equal, and then it starts to fall off. It gets shorter. And that's because I did assume the inaction of conservation moving forward. And this is a question that I think we should discuss here in Water Commission in terms of visually how to represent that. In the past, we've had kind of like a clear bar on top that shows conservation, so we can represent total demand. There's been some lively conversation around that. And I'd like to have that conversation again, because I think there's probably different ways to communicate this strategy to our water supply portfolio. All right, Mr. Young.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned projecting out to 2024, we could be very, very tight on water.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point do we consider then whatever plan B is?
That's an excellent question. And it kind of ties into my next slide, but I'm going to go ahead and tackle it here, and then we'll move forward when we're ready.
Okay. And then I have another question for you, which you can answer when it's appropriate. Back to the prior slide, you had mentioned mandatory reductions. And maybe you could go back one slide and I could just quickly point out what I'm referring to. Yeah, the 15 and 20% mandatory conservation. So I'm going to assume that when we do that, or if we do that, then there's going to be a drop in revenue.
Yes.
And so there must be a whole other set of calculations and discussion and analysis that goes on to take into consideration what the consequences of that. Do we hear that at some point, that discussion? Does that come to us?
Yeah, so I think your two questions are actually pretty closely related. And so let me tackle the first question, and then I can answer your second as well.
Can I throw in a couple things? Because I think you're going to answer them all and you can get them in a line.
Okay.
Just real quickly, you showed turning on groundwater, and we've talked about the fact that the basins need 5 to 10 years to recover. And yet we could be going into a dry period where we're starting to turn it on. We already see it 2023, 2024. And if it continued, we don't have 10 years more to basically recover the groundwater basin. So what happens to groundwater if we continue going forward, and where's the 5 to 10 year recovery? Secondly, that we use, and Jeff brought it up, you use the word mandatory conservation. Again, we've always basically said, well, we basically have required targets or, required conservation, but we don't have mandatory conservation that we look at every household has to hit a target. So just the use of the word is a question that I had. And then the related to that in terms of, we look out 3 years, but if in fact, the drought continues for 5 or 7, our pre-planning for desal, we start to hit some triggers at some point of when you have to start pre-planning for desal. So I'll just put that, the groundwater, what's happening if it continues for 5 or 7 years or more, what happens relative to the trigger for desal planning, at least here at the commission, in terms of our discussions of where we're going, and then the use of the word mandatory. So just throw that into your mix of your answers.
That's a lot. I do think that I can answer all of those questions, so let me give it a shot. If I forget something, please feel free to jump in and ask again. And it looks like I've got Mr. Hagmark as backup as needed. So first, let's start with where we are today. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very conservative plan because we don't know what rainfall is going to look like this winter or the next several winters. So we have to assume that we're going into 3 more dry years. That's our conservative approach. With that said, staff proposes that we come back to Water Commission and potentially Council in the spring. And this could be as early as February. By then, we're going to kind of know what our precipitation looks like for this winter. And if it's looking like it is going to be a dry winter, staff would recommend increasing our water shortage stage as outlined in our water shortage contingency plan from a stage 1 to a stage 2. And when council makes that decision, they also adopt a bunch of actions. And Ms. Wood is going to talk about this more in her presentation following mine, that encourage or incentivize our customers to reduce their water use. Commissioner Davis is correct in that when we talk about mandatory conservation, and maybe we do need to change the wording on that, what I'm saying is that we're going to set a target and we're going to ask all of our customers to do what they can to help us reach that target. But we're not talking about necessarily at this stage water rationing or like individual targets for individual customers. We're going to set a target for our water service area as a whole, and we're going to provide both assistance and incentives as well as regulations to help our customers get there. In terms of groundwater, I'm going to provide an update on our annual water supply management report in December. And in that report, we track the volume of drought storage water we have available to us to use in the drought and what we've used so far. And so we do have thousands of acre feet available still to use as needed. Our pumping capacity is about 3,500 acre feet per year, and that might be a little generous. So that's all we can use on a year-to-year basis. And that means that we do have several years worth of groundwater available to us if needed. In terms of the recovery, what we'd essentially be doing is restarting that clock. And so when we say it takes 5 to 10 years for the groundwater basins to recover, we'd kind of be restarting that clock, and we'd need another 5 to 10 years to get them back to pre-drought levels. I'm trying to remember other questions. I think I missed the second question that Commissioner Young had, and maybe another question or two from Commissioner Davis. Do anybody want to remind me?
I think one of the questions was just about planning. What is our plan? Should we find ourselves in this worst case scenario to start to ramp up additional production from desal?
Yeah, so we have in our adaptive management plan, in our enhanced urban water management plan, we have trigger points in terms of when we need to start doing the planning to expand desal so that we have additional production available to us by the time we need to meet those supplies. And we're tracking that closely. If we were under this worst case scenario where we're looking at, several dry years, the planning needs to happen in the next year or so, and then we'd be wanting to look at turning on or expanding desal production a few years out. So we're still safe within that planning horizon, and it's something that we're tracking closely, and it's something that we would continue to update Water Commission on as we track our supplies and demands moving forward.
Yeah, and on that point, I would think when you come back in the spring and we've seen what happened in the wintertime, and you're giving us kind of a new picture of where we're at in time, that'd be a good time to push out the bar a little bit farther to basically say, are we starting to get into that period where we need to rest our groundwater basins or save them for a later period of time? And the fact of like, maybe I could see very easily if the drought continued, we'd hit that trigger in 2025 to start planning for desal expansion. So I think the springtime discussion we're going to have will be pretty important to see whether we've had a wet winter or not. So I can wait and see the answer at that point in time, but I want to, at least flag the fact that that's a concern I have going forward, that we're continuing. It hasn't been, the drought's not over. It's over a 10-year drought. We got a little rainy period in the middle. This is a 10-year drought. It could be longer. And I saw this, PBS show the other day. University of Arizona did a thing on the Colorado River. Right there are mega droughts, and if this is the beginning of a mega drought, we're talking a whole different ballgame. But I can wait till spring to get into the details. I just want to flag it for now in this report. But thanks for your answers.
Excellent, and we are on the same page. Definitely
Commissioner
noted.
Kammeier, Cora jumped in, so go ahead, Cora, and then Jeff.
Well, did we want to wrap up with Jeff's questions first?
Jeff,
Well,
are you continuing on your questions?
Yeah, my question is part of this answer that's ongoing. So how much, if we wanted an additional 1,000 acre feet of desal, we made that decision today, how long would it take us to actually be able to go through all of the planning, the permitting, the design work, the construction, and be able to turn that 1,000 acre feet on?
And I'm going to let Mr. Hagmark take that one.
Yeah. So when we initially selected, in this case, IDE, who designed and built and is currently operating our facility, we had them design the facility for the full permitted capacity of 10,000 acre feet a year. And we're currently producing 3. So they have designed that facility around this modular idea that we can add additional treatment units as needed. And so we have the design done. We have the permits in place to support that expansion. And so it is a matter of lining up the funding now to move forward with that next phase, which was roughly, it's a little over 1,000 acre feet, but that would be another treatment unit, would add roughly 1,000 acre feet of additional production.
Okay, so the question is, how much time would it take to actually put in that 1,000 acre foot module and turn it on?
So we've asked this question of IDE before, and I think I've been kind of holding off on asking that question again, given the supply chain issues that are currently going on. But when we talked to them before, it was roughly a 2-year, you say go, and 2 years later, you're producing water. And that was we padded that. So we'd have to revisit that. It's been 4 or 5 years now since I've asked them that question. And so is that still the timeline? Is it faster? Is it slower? I think it's kind of a unique time right now with all the supply chain issues. I might get a different answer right now.
Well, I would encourage you to still ask the question. We may be in a supply chain problem for who knows how long. And I think it would, behoove us to understand exactly what the situation is at this point. We can ask the question again in 2 years or annually, but I think we should ask it. Thank you.
Commissioner Kammeier, Cora, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And this question might fit better in the water conservation roundup, so feel free to punt it if that makes sense. But I was just wondering how the Conservation as a California Way of Life legislation factors into this. I think reporting for that starts in 2024, and I know it's a bit of a ramp up, so it's kind of on the tail end of this planning horizon, but could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and that might also, like you said, fit into the next presentation better, but I'll go ahead and give it a shot now. It looks like Ms. Wood is here as well, and she probably has even better information than I do. We've been tracking closely the requirements for conservation as a way of life. And it's looking like because the city has reduced its water use so significantly, compared to our 2020 target and then compared to demands pre-drought, that additional conservation as a requirement for the conservation of the way of life legislation is not going to be particularly, what do I want to say, onerous on the city. We think that we're going to be pretty close to our targets just based on our current plan. The Water Conservation Strategic Plan, which was adopted as part of the the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan, did incorporate programs to help us meet those targets. And so I don't know if Ms. Wood, you have anything else to add to that question or answer?
Thank you, Ms. Corey. I think the only thing to add is that our modeling approach, we can always revisit, and we were planning to once the final recommendations and adoptions are done by the State Water Resources Control Board. But from what we're seeing over the past few months, and certainly this very busy week, is that we're still looking like we are going to meet the standards that they're laying out because the water use in the community is so efficient already. But that's something that we are continuing to track and will do for our future modeling efforts.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will, if we can jump to the next slide. That was actually my last slide for the presentation. So I'm happy to take any more questions. I'm also wanted to just put it out there one more time if we wanted to discuss any modifications we want to make to this graphic to better communicate supply versus demand. It's always kind of a lively discussion. I'm happy to facilitate that. What do you say, Chair Davis?
No, I was gonna just open it up for questions for the commission, and Commissioner Young had jumped on already, so Jeff, go ahead.
So my other question was, what happens to the revenue side of our operation if you have these are targets? I understand they're not going to be mandatory per household, but they're targets for the community. So let's say the community responds, well, we get these reductions in conservation or increases in conservation. How do you then project and forecast what happens to the business side of what we do with less revenue?
Chair, I'll take that one. Chair Davis, Commissioner Young, first and foremost, the priority is the water. Ensuring that we have the water. Money is important, but it is secondary to this discussion. And we do carry reserves. We carry disaster reserves, emergency reserves to kind of cover situations just like this. And, you know, fortunately, this commission and the council have supported the rates needed, and we've been able to recover our reserves. So our reserves are at policy right now. They're looking good. They're where we need them to be. And so as much as, you know, it's going to create a lot of fiscal challenges for us, we have those reserves standing by for just such a situation. And so as much as we can be ready, we are, and we'll adjust as necessary, but it would be secondary to making sure that we conserve the water first.
So in these projections then, Dakota, I take it then you're also thinking about the reserves and how long we could go making these adjustments by drawing on reserves to backfill any shortage.
Yeah, no, so she's focused solely on the water. At the financial side, Malcolm and I have been looking at that, and what it will take is, you know, if we do go down this need for additional conservation, we will be coming back to the Water Commission to talk about projections of rates, and in particular, whether or not we may need to be looking at a different rate structure to support us going into that. So that'll be part of that conversation. Hopefully it rains and we don't have to have that conversation, but if it doesn't, we're prepared to come back to this council or commission and talk about that.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Questions from other commissioners? Commissioner Kamler, go ahead, Cora.
Not a question, but just a comment, Dakota, to your question. I do think that having some sort of white bar, clear bar at the top to indicate that we're considering conservation to be a supply and an important part of the portfolio. And then I'm not sure you could reflect this on the graph, but it would be interesting to have this narrative of, you know, if we weren't conserving this much, here is what we would have to be doing, or here's the water supply that we would have to be drawing more on. That's a little bit more of a complex message, but I do think having it on the supply graph would be a great way to represent it.
I have a second to that because I'm going to go back, and I was never one for taking it off, so I'd like to see it back too at some point. We can see what that looks like. Councilmember Sneddon.
Thank you. The ongoing discussion of the white bar, and I also agree.
Yeah.
I just have a quick sort of question, and I really appreciate this conversation about much bigger water supply questions and messaging. And this is such a small thing, but in terms of sort of messaging to the community and to visitors, also just always this question of water that is supplied at restaurants without being asked. If we could consider going back to a recommendation that we are just not serving water unless requested. And it's so small, but it really is such a big message for visitors in particular too, that we are a drought conscious community. And just wanted to ask that minor question.
And maybe what we could do is talk a little bit about that in the next presentation, because I think what we want to try and figure out is what that nice balance of enforcement is. I think we can certainly encourage. We do a lot of encouraging in this line of work, encouraging it, but to what ends do you want us to go and get the comfort level of the Water Commission and council liaison on that? That would be really helpful.
I would just say encouragement and not, harsh enforcement, but messaging, just some messaging that's where we are, just to put that out there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Keller.
Yes, I just wanted to, get into the discussion of the white bar. I think it's useful, but it's complicated because we have kind of a new baseline. And that's one of the reasons why we said, well, we kept saying, is this with respect to the original baseline or the new baseline? And that's why it got really complicated. So I think we should be careful. I understand what we're trying to do, but I think it just gets a little complicated and considering an additional supply rather than a conservation. Okay.
How about I propose as part of the presentation next month, we will bring back some options for the commission to consider, and hopefully we can adopt one going forward.
Good idea. Great idea.
I
Okay,
can do that.
great. Well, again, great presentation as always, and a lot of food for thought. I'll just leave you with my things that I had again. Kachuma and the carryover question, because it's so important to our supply and our planning. That one is going to shake up our water supply management if it changes. Our groundwater, I will just put out there again, I'm concerned that we're not resting our groundwater basins adequately for a continued drought going forward. And then the new normal basically being more than 3 years and something that we need to plan for, at least at the Water Commission level, basically future expansion of desal and see where we're at out 5 or 7 years from now if we continue in a continued dry cycle. We can't be over prepared in that regard. Great report, Ms. Corey. I always enjoy this, and we'll continue that discussion next month relative to the options on how we graphically show conservation on our supply bars. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's feedback today.
In fact, this whole conversation is going to continue in some form in our next item, the Water Conservation Roundup. Again, that's all part of the discussion of how we deal with water supply planning. So with that, Mr. Hagmark, or can I jump right into Ms. Wood? And go ahead, Madeline, start.
Thank you, Chair Davis and members of the Commission. My name is Madeline Wood. I'm the Water Conservation Supervisor. And this morning I will be talking you through what we're calling the Water Conservation Roundup. So get ready. So you can go to the presentation, Raquel, thank you. And we'll go to the second slide. Thank you. So today I'm going to provide some information on the long-term water demand management measures that are employed by the city, which are part of water supply planning. So a lot of this has been touched on during Dakota's presentation. And these efforts are documented in our water conservation strategic plan, and I'll provide an overview of our current conservation programs. And then next, I'll provide information on short-term extraordinary demand management measures that can be used in times of drought or other water shortage emergencies. And those plans are documented in our water shortage contingency plan. And that covers the various water shortage stages, the action levels, and our demand reduction tools. Next slide, please. So the city has had a robust conservation program since the 1970s, and for the past decade, our water efficiency measures have been evaluated for cost effectiveness, and that's based on the avoided cost of additional water supplies. As many of you may remember, this water conservation strategic plan was presented at Water Commission last fall for review and input, and then was adopted by City Council as part of the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan this past June. So the plan prioritizes conservation measures, and it lays the foundation to meet the future water efficiency objectives that are currently being set by the state. And the analysis in the plan is the result of a modeling exercise that we did with our consultants, Madaus Water Management, and that's using their decision support system model. This model is used to prepare long-range and detailed demand projections that assess the impact of water efficiency programs on demand. And the model is what's called an end-use model. So it breaks down total water production to specific water end uses, such as plumbing fixtures and appliances. And this bottom-up approach allows for multiple criteria to be considered to estimate future demands, such as the effects of natural fixture replacement, California Plumbing Code effects, and our conservation programs. These projections also include projections about population and its effect on demand, housing, economic growth, et cetera. And that's what fed into our Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan. We had current and new proposed conservation measures that were evaluated for cost effectiveness, and that's based on the avoided cost of additional water supplies. So in other words, is it more cost effective to implement this conservation measure to reduce the demand, or is it more cost effective to develop additional supplies to meet that demand? Next slide, please. So I'm now going to give a brief overview of our current conservation programs, some of which are part of utility operations, some are rebates, some are public information, et cetera. So to start off, we've had water efficient landscape design standards for the city since 1989. And these require that development projects going through design review must have a plant palette and irrigation system that complies with our city standards. The standards are intended to promote conservation while allowing for flexibility in designing attractive and cost-effective landscapes. So some of the requirements include minimal use of turf grass, waterways plants, drip irrigation, smart irrigation controllers, pressure regulation, and mulch. Next slide, please. We also have our irrigation budgets, and these are for our dedicated irrigation meters. We've had this since 2013, and the purpose of providing a monthly irrigation budget is to bill customers based on the water needs of the landscaping. So each specific irrigation account has a different budget based on the type of plants and the size of the irrigated area, and then that budget varies monthly based on changes in weather. So water use within that irrigation budget is charged at the Tier 1 rate, and water use in excess of the budget is charged at the Tier 2 rate. Next slide, please. Our most popular program is the free water checkup program, which currently we've transitioned to doing mostly over the phone or via FaceTime during COVID, which really helps empower our customers to evaluate and diagnose and repair issues on their property. We help evaluate water use on the property, identify leaks, review sprinkler timer schedules, and provide information on rebates and programs. This is how we get a lot of customers involved in our programs. Next slide, please. So this is our Flume rebate. This is a program we launched this year, and the Flume device provides down-to-the-minute water use data to help track water use, and it provides really important leak notifications for customers. It consists of a smartphone app and a device that easily straps on to the city water meter. It's compatible with most of the city's meters, and city customers pay just $75, and it's all an online direct distribution rebate, so it's really simple to apply for. Next slide, please. We have a rebate for high efficiency clothes washers. So these more efficient front loader machines that you see here, they use 35 to 50% less water and half the amount of energy per load than the older, typically top loader models. And we have a $150 rebate, and that's also an online simple rebate. Next slide, please. And we have our mulch delivery rebate. This is for the county's mulch, which you can always pick up yourself for free, as these Mulch Madness basketball players are doing, but you can get a dump truck load delivered. And so we rebate and pay for the delivery fee of that, which is up to 2 dump truck loads for free every year. Next slide, please. In terms of our commercial incentive programs, we've got a really detailed program for our high water use commercial customers. So it's a detailed fixture survey of all of the end uses on the property. We calculate the flow rates, the frequency of use. We put it all into an analysis to determine which upgrades or projects have a return on investment of 3 years or less. And then we provide a custom incentive of up to $15,000 to cover those cost-effective programs. Next slide, please. We have free restaurant and lodging table tents and towel rack hangers for water served on request, and towel and linen laundering. This is something we also do countywide, so we have similar messaging at other restaurants and hotels in the county. Next slide, please. This is our Green Gardener program. It's training for maintenance gardeners on resource efficient and pollution prevention landscape maintenance practices. We've had it for over 20 years. It's a 15-week class that's taught bilingually through City College School of Extended Learning. We have spring, summer, and fall classes. And then we have the Advanced Green Gardener course that's every spring that has more hands-on labs, and they do a class project as well. And this is one of our regional programs. So many of the other water providers, including the County Water Agency, we partner on some of our programs, and this is an example of a regional water efficiency program. Next slide, please. For our Garden Wise TV show, this is an ever entertaining TV show in which local experts discuss concepts and techniques for water-wise gardens. It can be viewed on YouTube, Channel 20 and Channel 18. It's produced by City TV and is another regional program supported by other water providers in the county. Next slide, please. For our gray water programs, we've worked with the Building and Safety Division for permit-free laundry to landscape systems, for permit-free shower to flower systems. So these are both of the simple systems that under the California Plumbing Code can be permit-free if the water supplier and the building official determine it to be so. And then we support these with 101 classes, webinars, hands-on workshops, and professional training for gray water. Next slide, please. For rainwater harvesting, we really like to focus on capturing rainwater in the soil to be used by plants. And that's using the slow sink and spread approach to infiltration, essentially. So this type of landscaping can go by many names. It's called low impact design, ocean friendly gardens, rain gardens, etc. But the main focus is the same. It's to use the water where it lands by directing downspouts or rain chains into swales and berms to slowly infiltrate into the mulch and soil rather than running off the property. So we have classes, webinars, and hands-on workshops. We also have offered professional training for rainwater harvesting. And in a similar fashion, the Creeks Division, who is in charge of a lot of the stormwater compliance for the city, they do have development stormwater BMPs to capture and treat runoff generated from a 1-inch storm for development projects. Next slide, please. We have a lot of beautiful demonstration gardens for the community to visit. The Firescape Garden is located on the corner of 192 and Stanwood Drive, and that's in partnership with the fire department. The southern half of Alice Keck Park is a demonstration garden, and that's located in downtown. What you see here on this, the picture on the slide, is the Spencer Adams Park Rain Garden. That's in front of the Lawn Bowls Club on De La Vina and Victoria. And then down at El Estero, we have our recycled water demonstration garden. And then we have some partnership gardens. The Association of Realtors has a really beautiful rain garden on Chapala and Mitchell Terrena, and the Botanic Garden Waterwise Home Garden. Next slide, please. And we have recognition programs. So the Water Hero is an annual award to honor an individual, a business, or an organization that has gone above and beyond in their water conservation efforts and serves as an example of water efficiency in our community. And the Waterwise Garden Contest celebrates and recognizes beautiful and water efficient residential gardens throughout Santa Barbara County. That one's another regional program. Next slide, please. For youth education, we have class presentations. We also have musical assemblies, but don't worry, it's not city staff singing. We have professional musical assembly providers that come in and provide them throughout the county. We offer field trips to our water facilities. We have our Waterwise High School video contest, which is countywide to produce a PSA for water conservation. And we have our Waterwise Science Fair Award, which is also a countywide program. Next slide, please. We have a lot of great online resources. I just wanted to highlight a few here. What you see on the screen is our Waterwise Garden database. So this is a really robust website that has pictures of local gardens, and you can click on the gardens and click on each plant that you see, learn more about the plant, add them to a plant list, bring it to your local nursery, etc. It's a really great way to get people to get inspired about Waterwise gardens or learn more about specific plants that they might want to incorporate. We also have a watering calculator where you can type in information about your landscaping and it will produce a sprinkler timer schedule for you, a suggested one. We have our weekly percent adjust, which is how to turn your normal conventional sprinkler timer into a smart timer. There's a percentage change that you can make to either reduce or increase the amount of watering to match the weather, rather than just the set it and forget it type of scheduling. And then we've got a variety of DIY videos that have become even more popular during COVID. Next slide, please. And looking ahead, we have our automated metering infrastructure project, which is in the early implementation phase right now, but this will help us target and reach our customers with even more conservation opportunities. So it will be hourly water use data that can help with water use monitoring, leak alerts, and messaging. And the project's currently underway and expected to have customer access to the data in fall 2023. Next slide, please. So here's some participation highlights from the conservation plan. These were the 5 years leading up to the conservation plan, where you can see the impact of some of our most popular programs. Our irrigation evaluations are basically a subset of our water checkups. So we did about 7,000 water checkups, and about half that are specific irrigation evaluations going through the timer. What we often find is multiple start times. So that's something that our water resources specialists call a scheduled leak. It's basically water you did not intend to use, and it is going through your program every day, and you might not be aware of it. We've done over 1,000 landscape rebates issued, almost 2,000 free mulch deliveries, and then our video views have increased even since then due to COVID, which is great to see. We reach about 2,000 youth every year through all of our programs, and then we've had over 2,000 class attendees and about 450 hands-on workshop attendees in that time period. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the impact of long-term water conservation throughout the city. And this graph really tells the story of rain, water use, and population over the last 120 years. So the blue bars on the bottom are rainfall in inches, and the orange bands highlight the different drought periods. The blue line is the population growth, and the green jaggedy line is the water production in acre feet per year. So what you can see here is the city's commitment to water conservation, and we've had significant reductions in water use over the past 30 years. Currently, the community water use has decreased to the same level it was in the late 1950s, yet we have a population that has doubled since that time. And the city is a nationwide leader in water conservation. We were awarded the platinum level of recognition for our conservation program by the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and there are only 6 other water utilities in the country that have been awarded that platinum level of recognition. So this is a great demonstration of the community's commitment to water conservation and making water efficiency a Santa Barbara way of life. Next slide, please. All right, so now we'll focus on the short-term demand management measures that can be used in times of drought or other water shortage emergencies. And those plans are documented in our water shortage contingency plan, which covers the various water shortage stages, the action levels, and the demand reduction tools. Next slide, please. So the water shortage contingency plan is a plan for how the city intends to respond to drought or unforeseen water shortage emergencies. It's a standalone document that was adopted separately from the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan of June of this year. It was developed to meet the Department of Water Resources requirements for shortage plans, and the requirements are quite prescriptive, but our plan was written with the maximum flexibility for city decision makers in mind. It details the various levels of drought response and actions and provides response options as supply conditions change. Next slide, please. So this table contains our water shortage stages. It addresses supply shortages ranging from normal supply, i.e. no shortage, to a slowly developing drought to sudden and potentially catastrophic interruptions such as earthquakes or a failure of the water system. And consistent with past plans and experience with severe droughts, including the most recent record drought, the plan uses 4 stages that structure the city's response to water shortages, yet there is flexibility in each stage for the percent supply reduction that's needed. And this is especially important because of the diversity of the city's water supply portfolio, and we have varying degrees of drought impacts to our supplies. So we have normal supply, which would be 0 stage essentially. And that's if we have a full Kachuma entitlement is projected for the coming water year, and there's no extraordinary shortages in any other city supplies. The stage 1 has a reduction of about 0 to 15%, and this is what we would call a water shortage watch. That's when the Kachuma entitlement reduction is projected for the coming water year, and we are assuming continued dry weather, as Ms. Corey has explained, or there's an extraordinary reduction in other city supplies. But stage 2 has a supply reduction range of 15 to 25%. This is called a water shortage alert, and that's when we have continuing conditions of average or less rainfall that have resulted in continuing decline in Kachuma storage. We have a reduction in entitlement, or there's an extraordinary reduction in other supplies. A stage 3 has a reduction of 25 to 50%, so that one's pretty large, and this is what we would call a water shortage emergency. So the Kachuma supplies are projected to be exhausted during the coming water year, or there's a catastrophic interruption to city supplies. And then a stage 4 is greater than 50% of a supply reduction. And this is what we would call a catastrophic water system emergency. And that's when we are expecting a catastrophic interruption to city water supplies or an emergency has occurred, such as an earthquake. Next slide, please. So the shortage plan identifies various actions that can be considered by Water Commission and Council during the various water shortage stages. Depending on the nature of the shortage, the city can elect to implement one or several of these response actions to mitigate the shortage and reduce the gaps between supply and demand. The demand reduction tools fall into the various categories of expanded public outreach, water use regulations, enhanced services and rebates, operational changes, and development restrictions. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share a sampling of the possible response actions, and there are many more that are detailed in the plan. We could expand community outreach with increased advertising, community presentations, and workshops, offer or expand rebates on high efficiency plumbing fixtures, offer or expand rebates for replacing high water use landscaping and irrigation with WaterWise landscaping, require food service establishments to only serve water upon request, require pool and spa covers when not in use. Next slide, please. Prohibit irrigation during the hours when evaporation is highest and or limit watering to assigned watering days. Prohibit using potable water to wash hard surfaces or for decorative fountains. Prohibit irrigation of turf grass, restrict irrigation to hand watering, or prohibit all outdoor water use. And as you see, they increased in severity as I went down the list. So one thing to note with these demand reduction actions is that they require different levels of enforcement pursuant to council direction. In the most recent drought period, council was not in favor of patrols and enforcement that were akin to water cops. And they took the approach of setting a conservation target for the community to achieve and some basic water use regulations, but really left it up to each customer to decide how to conserve to meet that community-wide target. So our enforcement during the last drought and currently was complaint-based, and it was quite effective and well-received. For future water shortages, the approach to enforcement is part of the decision-making for Water Commission and Council, and some regulations do require more enforcement and staffing than others. Another thing to note that is in the last drought, the State Water Resources Control Board had set statewide water use regulations that all urban water suppliers had to adopt. And they are considering doing that again. So staff is continuing to track those discussions as those may dictate many of our own water use regulations if we proceed to that in the next 6 months or so. Next slide, please. So to end, I wanted to give a snapshot of conservation for each customer class during the last drought, because it really highlights that everyone played a role in making through that historic drought. So this table and graph show the same data. It's 2014 to 2018 water use per customer class compared to the 2013 baseline. So you can see that the conservation savings are really found in the discretionary water use. Single family residential, irrigation meters for residential, and irrigation meters for commercial had the highest savings. And that's due to many customers significantly reducing their outdoor water use, letting their lawns go golden, and making some permanent changes like upgrading landscaping and irrigation systems, from which we are still seeing the long-term savings today. Next slide, please. And I'm available for questions and discussion.
Great presentation, Ms. Wood. I always enjoy hearing the programs you have going. Commissioner Kammeier, Cora, please.
Yes, thank you. A couple comments and questions. First of all, thank you so much for giving this presentation, and just great to see what a robust and successful conservation program we have here in the city. So great work on that, and it's really fun to see the results of that. I had a question about drought surcharges, and if that's something that the city has done in the past or explored. I don't really know that much about them, but I know that they've been enacted in other cities during the drought. And I was just wondering, when you were going through that list of kind of drought responses, that popped up for me.
Commissioner Kammeier, that's a great question, and Joshua might be able to back me up on this. It was something we discussed in the last drought. I believe we were going through a new rate modeling at the time, and so we considered a variety of options, and I believe we took it to Water Commission too. One of our concerns was about when the shortage ended, that we would most likely have to get rid of the drought surcharge, and we might still be in need of generating that revenue, because as we know, the demand doesn't bounce back very quickly after drought, because we still see considerable savings today. Do you want to fill in a little bit, Mr. Hagmark? I wasn't part of all those discussions.
No, that was my recollection as well. And it was interesting here on the South Coast. We got to see agencies doing various versions of that, and we certainly contemplated that, kicked that around with the Water Commission, and ultimately landed on, we're going to adjust our rates, but not have these surcharges. And we were really glad. We watched Goleta kind of go through just a financial upheaval when they dropped the surcharges, but financially they needed that revenue. And so they were scrambling to try and get rates in place to shore up their free fall. So not a fan of that. And so we've kind of stuck with a more traditional, we'll raise our rates to reflect the level of conservation or revenue that we need. It seemed to work best for us.
And Joshua, Montecito did have surcharge also, didn't it?
They did, and they had similar issues. It's the exit that becomes kind of a problem.
And then just another question or more comment back on the slide, looking at the different contributions to water savings during the last year. I don't know if you were able to go back one slide. But I was really interested and a little bit surprised to see that, because it looked like, while my understanding was that it was mostly residential, it looked like it was pretty widely distributed. Like everyone really, all the sectors really seemed to pitch in and save water, which was really cool to see. And I don't know, like, for example, I saw the commercial landscapes was a big contribution. And I don't know if that's just because they have bigger landscapes. And so, taking a single action had more impact. Could you speak just a little bit more maybe to what you know about what's reflected in those percentages?
Krista,
Sure.
Cal, can you go back one slide so we can have that up while we're talking about it?
I think what we were pleased to see throughout that drought was how everyone was pulling their weight. And keep in mind, these are very dry years. So we're not getting rainfall to supplement the irrigation. People were really taking drastic actions to reduce their water use. And typically that's going to be outside, especially for businesses. There's generally not a lot of excess water use. They're always looking at the bottom line. And so for residential and commercial customers, we really encourage people to look at what they could do outside, whether it was simply a scheduling thing and sort of living with things being a little drier, or if it was more permanent reductions like changing out the plant palette. We even see savings with agriculture, and keep in mind, very dry years, you would need to generally irrigate more, and everyone took a really detailed look at where they were using their water. And we felt it. We were here to support all kinds of people for many years. So we had a lot of requests and a lot of need for conservation support for all types of customers to really just help them fine tune and figure out where they were going to find those savings. So it's sort of across the board. As you can see, recreation, really great savings. The Parks Division had a great plan. They laid out what's passive recreation, what's active recreation, how can we stress the turf, how can we still keep it a safe playing field, and they really took a really decisive way at looking at how to conserve, and that's the Parks Division right there, is most of that irrigation recreation, as well as the school district. So we are really pleased to see it across the board.
And just one follow-up question for the irrigation residential, what does that reflect? Because aren't most single-family homes just on 1 meter?
Yes, definitely. So the irrigation residential is separated irrigation. It's a lot of it's multifamily or HOAs. So it's a separate irrigation meter that's serving just the irrigated area, separate from the living spaces. And then we do have some larger larger single-family residential properties where it is more cost-effective for them to have a meter for their indoor water use and a separate meter that's on that irrigation budget that's for their outdoor water use. So there are some single-family homes in that, but a lot of it's multifamily and HOA.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cooney. Lindsay.
Right. So I did sort of like in the mood of what we were all talking about, how Santa Barbara really, the population here really does sort of like embrace the idea of saving water. I had a question about the Green Gardener program, and sort of just because the picture that you included had the name of a company on some of the guys' shirts that I recognized. Is it possible, or is it published? Is there a list somewhere where, say, I or anyone living in the city, if you wanted to get like hire a place that had gone through that class or gone through that certification, does that list exist somewhere? Is that published?
That's a great question. Commissioner Cooney, yes, that is on our countywide website. So that's waterwisesb.org. Also greengardener.org will point you there. And that's a public list. So some folks who go through it choose not to have a public listing, they sometimes work for a private estate and are just going to stick with that. But most folks choose to be put on the public list, and then they do have to go through continuing education units and renew their license to stay on the list. Because as I said, we've had it for more than 20 years, so we're not going to keep people on for 20 years. So it is a public list and people are available. And as you saw, some of them are part of a larger company and some of them are owner operators of their own business.
No, that's fantastic. I was just thought people I know would appreciate having that info. So thank you.
Great. Other questions? Anybody, any other questions at this point? Councilmember Sneddon, please.
Thank you. Just quickly, it's really astonishing how much people conserve just based on education and incentives. And it's just amazing what you're able to do in that regard and with communication. And I guess it's just a question about back to the water in restaurants or things like that. Like, what is your opinion about what is the best way to proceed with that and to take your recommendation? I think you do such an extraordinary job in just getting the community to want to conserve and to do that. And so just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Councilmember Sneddon, it's definitely something we always consider in terms of what's a messaging opportunity compared to considerable water savings. And I think for the water served on request, we've actually gone through, a few changes since then. We've had more restaurants who just permanently either put it on their menu, water's only served on request, or they use their table cards and they have just generally adopted that. We also have, I think because of COVID, we have more order at the counter. So you have a self-service water station, which is something that I love to see. So whoever wants water just walks up and gets it. But for the true table service, we did struggle during the drought in terms of restaurant staff turnover and the management constantly needing to train new staff members to not bring water. So we did have a few people who would let us know when they were getting water without asking, and we would use it as an education opportunity and do a presentation and talk to everyone in the restaurant about the importance of it. But typically they would also have turnover and we would be back out there again. So that one can be a little tricky. And then what we have heard from the restaurant community is, we hear a few people who tell us that they were served water, and they more frequently hear from customers who are upset that they were not served water. So they hear the inverse, which is, we've been sitting here for 10 minutes, where's our water? And I think that's something we don't hear because we're telling them to not serve water. And so that one's a little tricky for the restaurants. What I would prefer to see, and what I wouldn't be surprised if we see, is if it becomes a statewide regulation where it's just in California, so that Santa Barbara is not unique and people get confused and upset about not getting served water, that just in California, you're not going to get served water here unless you ask for it. And that could be a regulation that the state board moves toward because they did in the last drought. And that's easier because tourists and people coming from other areas in California are not going to start yelling at the wait staff. And I think that would be a little easier to digest.
Thanks so much for answering that. I think it's really, really helpful. And I'll continue to sort of take your guidance on that and just publicly encourage people to only serve water on request. Thank you so much. And I realize it's just a small thing and you've done this whole presentation of really extraordinary conservation measures and really commend you for what you've been able to do through education and outreach. And thank you.
Okay, we're actually running about 20 minutes behind, so we're going to run way past 11 o'clock this morning for those who can stay. I'm going to close my comments by saying a couple things. One, I love the rainfall water demand population graph. Really cool graph. The AMI, I was in the beta group, absolutely love it, and absolutely we use it to kind of see what our water use is doing. Personal comments received from members of the public who don't even know I'm on the Water Commission. Ms. Wood and her staff are incredibly knowledgeable and helpful. I've heard so many positive comments about personal interactions with the public regarding Ms. Wood and her staff that it's really, I need to put that on the record. And lastly, you're really walking the walk. Lawns go golden, not brown. They go golden. I love it. So with that, I gotta really thank you. Great presentation. We'll be talking about this going forward because we are in a drought, and we'll come back and see that. Okay, with that, I'm actually going to close this item because we are behind, as I indicated. Okay?
Chair
Is there
Davis,
any
can I
public
use-
comment? Is there
Yes,
any,
I know.
is there any public comment on either item 6A, the water supply update, or on 6B, the water conservation roundup? We'll take comments on either of those two items this time. Madam Clerk, is there anyone wishing to speak publicly on either of those two items?
Chair Davis, we do not have public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Hagmark, thank you for the reminder. That takes us on to then item 6C. This is the wastewater system annual report. Mr. Hagmark.
Chair Davis, commissioners, I am pinch hitting. Ms. Flessie had a family emergency and just had to run out of the building. So I am taking over. So please bear with me. I was not planning to kick off this presentation, but I will say I am excited to be here and giving the commission a glimpse of what's going on behind the scenes in our wastewater operations. We're planning to do the same for water as well. This is a long time coming. We've been doing collection system annual reports for many years now, and kind of rolling that all into a comprehensive report where we're going to hit on major performance measures, challenges and successes that we're having within the wastewater system that may not normally come to the attention of the commission or the public. Next slide. So today we're going to go over treatment, which you have probably not heard from in a long time. And obviously we'll be doing a recap of where we are with collections. And then we'll finish off with the capital improvement projects. Next slide. Before we get into that, I think it's worth stopping to note just how challenging this last year has been. But not only that, some of the unsung heroes that have continued to show up every day and make sure that our wastewater system is providing a protection of public health and the environment. So first off, I want to recognize Esteban Zambrano, who is our Employee of the Month for this year. And you know, I talk about a guy who is at work every single day and has really stepped it up for his team. He works really hard to make sure that our wastewater collection system is operating properly, and has even recently stepped up to be the superintendent when we lost our superintendent, and just always there. He is so passionate about his service to this community. It's amazing. I love working with him, and I'm honored that you're going to get to hear from him today when he provides an overview of the collection system. On the right side is our Cottage Hospital rehab team. We did some major rehabilitation of some sewer mains just outside Cottage Hospital. Lots of coordination because the hospital is a 24/7 operation as well. And this team worked to get that work done at night, making sure we didn't have any major disruptions to the hospital. So kudos to that team. And then on the left, another unsung heroes are these El Estero operators who, during their inspections, noticed a significant safety issue with one of our critical transformers. You are all aware that we are trying to move forward with a $30 million electrical upgrade project, and have finally been, have identified some funding for this project. But in the meantime, we have some aging infrastructure, and while doing an inspection, we noticed not only a safety issue, but an issue in which could have brought down major components of the wastewater treatment plant. These guys here identified the problem and then worked quickly to line up a replacement and get it repaired without major disruptions to treatment. And these things go on, it seems like regularly enough. And we're just so fortunate to have such competent and dedicated wastewater staff. So I just wanted to recognize that and make that in the record. And with that, I would like to, next slide, I would like to hand the presentation off to Thomas Welch, our wastewater treatment superintendent, who's going to walk you through all the work that he has going on at the plant. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Davis, members of the Water Commission. My name is Thomas Welch. I am the wastewater treatment superintendent. I'm here to present on our annual report for El Estero. Next slide, please. This is the first time we're submitting an annual report to the Water Commission. We have several annual reports to our regulatory agencies, including for our NPDES permit, our air pollution control district permit, our recycled water permit as well. So we took those reports as our basis, and you can see the outline of the report we submitted to you on the screen. I'm going to try and follow this outline as best I can, but we have a lot of material to cover. So since this is our first time going through this, we would definitely appreciate any feedback or input on topics that you'd like us to expand on more in the future. Next slide, please. So before I get started, I really want to point out the interdisciplinary team that really makes El Estero happen. I'm really fortunate, 4 months into my new role, to have such a competent team of professionals keeping this facility running every day. The photo on the right is our secondary upgrade startup team, and there's labs, staff, operations, maintenance, engineering, pre-treatment, all working together to make sure we had a successful startup of our secondary process in 2019. And that collaboration continues every day. Next slide, please. First off, I want to give you just show you a quick diagram of our treatment process here at El Estero. I'm not going to go through every treatment process, but I wanted to point out some key inputs and outputs of the treatment facility. The flow comes in through the top left through our bar screens and influent pump station. Then it goes through the liquid treatment process across the top of the screen, primary and secondary treatment, going into our contact chamber for disinfection before getting discharged to the ocean. On the bottom right of the screen, you can see our recycled water system where we siphon off the water from the ocean outfall before it gets there and put it through membrane treatment, disinfection, and then distribution into the city. The entire bottom left process includes our solids handling. So all the solids that are removed from the liquid stream get further treated through anaerobic digestion. We produce methane gas that we then capture to produce power. Right now we're producing about 50% of our power on site through our cogeneration partnership with Cal Power. And the last output is our biosolids that are getting hauled off site and composted for beneficial reuse on that little truck getting hauled off on the bottom left. Next slide, please. In addition to operating and maintaining El Estero, our maintenance staff is responsible for operating and maintaining the 7 sewage lift stations throughout the city. These are small pump stations embedded in the neighborhoods that are able to lift the water from low-lying areas so that the flow can gravity flow back to El Estero. The majority of our flow all just flows downhill through the pipes, but there's some low-lying areas that need to get pumped. So the biggest one station is Braemar. It's on the bottom left, kind of serving the lower Las Positas and Hidden Valley areas. That pumps it up Cliff Drive, and it can flow back down to the plant once it hits the high spot point. Next slide, please. Another portion of our influent coming into the plant is our pretreatment program. Wastewater plants with flows greater than 5 MGD, million gallons per day, are required to have a pretreatment program by federal regulations. So the goal of this program is to monitor industrial activity that may have pollutants that can pass through or interfere with the treatment plant operations. This program is really the first step of the treatment process, as it's much more effective to avoid a pollutant reaching the plant than trying to treat it once it gets here. The lab, we work with the lab on this program. The lab's pretreatment coordinator really implements the program, and she's responsible for ensuring our industrial dischargers maintain compliance through inspections, and they report self-monitoring reports to her as well. We also monitor the flow coming into the plant and leaving the plant for potential pollutants to make sure our process is removing all the pollutants effectively and try to identify any potential issues of pass through or interference with treatment. This program is customized to El Estero through these what are called local limits. So we'll end up setting local limits for our dischargers based on the treatment process here at El Estero. Next slide, please. The majority of the flow coming to El Estero is largely domestic, but we do have a few industrial users. In 2020, we had 22 identified industrial dischargers. There's a couple different categories. There's one, first is categorical industrial users. These are industries that are federally identified in the codes as potential sources of specific pollutants. We have 2 categorical industrial users. All our other significant industrial users are categorized as non-categorical industrial users, and there's 11 of them. We have 2 other types, groundwater dischargers, which are typically during construction activities where we're below the water table. They'll need to and dewater their construction sites. They will apply for a permit to discharge to the treatment plant. And there's direct dischargers, things like pressure washing and cleaning activities that produce wastewater directly discharged to us as well. This program is, like I said earlier, is really the first step of treatment. It's the adage that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure is really poignant with this program. Next slide, please. Switching from the influent to the effluent of the plant, part of our permit requirements is to inspect our outfall every year. We do have a 1.5 mile long ocean outfall. It's a 48-inch diameter pipe, and the last quarter mile has these 4-inch diameter ports you can see in the right photo. So that's the little hole in the side of the pipe is how the effluent's getting discharged out of the outfall. The divers that we contract with and swim the entire length that's exposed and provide us with video and pictures of the outfall and review that annually. The outfall is in good condition. It continues and will continue to serve the community well into the near future. One of the other systems out on the outfall is our set of buoys that we have marking the outfall to avoid boaters from anchoring over the outfall. And we inspect those twice per year to make sure that we're communicating well with the boating community. Next slide, please. Some of our performance measures, these are, we have quite a few performance measures. We're going to get into some data as we move down a little further, but these are projects that we identified to complete. The biggest one is completing the tertiary piping repairs. We had significant issues with piping on our tertiary system, and we've mitigated that through computer programming in early 2020, and then in fiscal year 2021, which is July 2020 to June 2021, we did some piping repairs. And when we talk about our asset management program, the development of that program allowed us to complete this work in-house, which is something that we would not have been able to do in the past. We are working in a much more organized fashion, so we were able to coordinate with the water distribution folks and do an interdisciplinary team to do all that major large diameter piping and plumbing work. Next slide, please. Some more of our performance measures. These are related to compliance with our regulatory permits. With the NPDES permit, that's our discharge permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We have a target of 99.9%. It was 100% compliance, which is a little bit of a rounding issue because we had one violation out of 7,000 analyses performed. So it's like 99.97, I think was the actual number. Air Pollution Control District is our, for air emissions, we were in compliance with that permit, and our next 2 targets are related to our asset management program, which has been extremely successful. This proactive maintenance work order target on the bottom is really a testament to how mature our asset management program is operating. Proactive work includes anything that's planned or preventative, and so really only 5% of our work hours were for urgent or emergency work. Next slide, please. So other program measures are things that are other things that we're monitoring around the plant. One of our big costs on from an operational basis is our chemical costs. This chart represents the total monthly costs for chemicals. Right now, we're spending about $50,000 per month on different bulk process chemicals. We monitor these on some chemicals on a minute by minute basis, and some on a daily, and everything else at least on a daily basis. We have been experiencing some logistical supply chain issues throughout the past year. Early in the year, there was sodium hypochlorite, our industrial bleach, and now we're experiencing issues with some of our other chemicals where we're having shortages. Do you have a question, Dr. Chair Keller or Commissioner Keller?
No, thank you. I was going to ask that question. I had turned on my camera when you answered my question, so thank you.
Great. So in addition to just having longer lead times and reduced availability for some of these chemicals, we're now seeing significant cost increases, which may challenge our budget in the coming year. Most recent one was we had a 34% increase in sodium hypochlorite costs, which on this graph is that large blue bar on the bottom. So that's right now around $10,000 to $15,000 a month, and we'll see how that adjusts as the market reacts to that change. Another one was we had a 300% price increase in citric acid. So that went from $5 to about $17 per gallon. That's a little sliver in the big scheme of things, but those kind of costs do propagate through our process. Next slide, please. As I spoke about digester gas production and its relation to our cogeneration unit, the majority of all of our gas is captured and burned in our cogeneration engine. So you can see the green bars on this chart is showing our gas production burned in the engine, and the two lines on the bottom are related to gas burned for digester heating or gas that's flared. And really the only time we're using those two alternate methods of burning the gas is when the engines are down for maintenance. There has been a slight downward trend in gas production, partly related to COVID and the pandemic, and because the organic material that's being broken down to produce this gas is from the community. So as some of these industries and the commercial activity slowed down, we did see a reduction in organic material coming to the plant. Vice Chair Young. Can I ask?
Thank you. Now I'm unmuted. So when we burn methane, are we also then creating CO2 as a byproduct?
Yes, it is. There is CO2 being produced as we're burning the methane, but this is it is still considered a renewable energy source because otherwise we would be flaring 100% of the methane produced. We're not allowed to discharge methane. Alternate treatments would just be aerobic treatment where you're pumping air and the biology is creating the CO2.
Oh, and I understand that, and that's a good use of the methane coming off. I'm interested though in what we might do with the CO2 that's coming off, because that is contributing to increased greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. So do we have any calculations that show us how much CO2 is coming off?
We're not currently quantifying the CO2 coming off any of the treatment processes, whether it's the aerobic secondary treatment process or the exhaust of the engines. Currently, there are some regulations coming down the pipe from Air Pollution Control District in the state that we're trying to address as an industry-wide issue rather than each individual treatment plant having to tackle these problems.
Okay.
So I was just going to add that, this is on the radar of our Sustainability and Resiliency Department. We have been talking with them. I think this is the challenge of our day, which is how do we sequester CO2? I do want to recognize that, I know you know this, Commissioner Young, but for our listeners that it's a very different type. This carbon dioxide or CO2 is from other organic material, which means it was captured in food and then ultimately was being released again, versus very different from fossil fuel that was sequestered under the ground and now is being released in the atmosphere. So it's a different level of significance, but nonetheless, I think your point is it represents a point source of CO2 that hopefully someday we'll have a way to sequester and turn that into a mineral, or put that back into water and sequester it so that it is not in the atmosphere.
Well said.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. In relation to the cogeneration that we were just speaking about, this on the left is a trend showing the blend of cogeneration power versus power from the Edison grid. Right now, we have been averaging around 50% of our power produced on site. This has taken a dip slightly over the years as we've had a decrease in gas production, and some of our newer equipment that's providing our high quality effluent with the new upgrades is using a little bit more power as we're having higher water quality produced from this process. On the right, you can see our fog material received. This is fat soils and grease that are being pumped out of grease traps from restaurants. This has taken quite a significant hit with COVID, as restaurant activity has really significantly slowed down. We have a dedicated fog hauler that has a contract that's up between 100 and 150 thousand gallons per month. So they do have room to expand and bring in more fog within their contract. Next slide, please.
I just want to speak really quickly to that, just for future discussions, not for today. So if you could go back. So right now, here's what we're getting, roughly about 50,000 gallons a month from Marburg. We have the capacity for 120 to 150,000 gallons a month. And as soon as we complete the electrical upgrade project, which includes an upgrade of our flare, we think we're going to be somewhere north of 200,000 gallons of capacity in our fog system, are being able to process fog material. So I just want to give you a concept, I think, or a baseline that I think we have some additional capacity. Certainly this is unusual time for our restaurant community, but I think there is room certainly to entertain multiple fog haulers in the future when we get to that point.
Thank you, and thank you for going back to the next slide. Awesome. For our maintenance activities, this is our really showing the success of our asset management program, showing some of the same metrics we discussed earlier. One of the new purchases we did in the last year was a new knuckle boom truck. It's that crane truck in the left picture. This is really important for us to quicken our response time for lift station emergencies and moving equipment around the plant, working on our recycled water system. It's reducing our reliance on facilities maintenance department within the city and other contractors that we've had to use historically. The lift station work is also a major portion of the work that our maintenance team is doing. And with COVID, they had a lot of significant impacts. They're a small team, and to increase social distancing, we actually split their shifts. Normally they all work during the day, but during the pandemic, we had a day crew and a night crew to make sure we had resiliency within our team. That did stress their productivity, but they still have been able to maintain the plant and the lift stations operating in a high capacity. Next slide, please. I think you've seen these slides or these graphs throughout the year as we are doing kind of community-wide surveillance of the COVID virus in the wastewater. This is a graph showing the 18-month period or almost a year period of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Some pandemic impacts to the treatment plant. There's been a lot of kind of direct and indirect impacts to the treatment plant due to COVID. Indirect impacts to businesses and business activity have kind of changed our flows into the plant. Direct impacts included having to change staffing levels, like I spoke about for the maintenance team, Our operations teams also had to increase their social distancing. Logistical supply chains have been strained throughout the pandemic. I spoke a little bit about the chemicals, but we also had significant PPE where, you know, gloves and masks have been used by the public. That's a regular need when you're working with wastewater. So early planning on our part to make sure we had significant inventory was important. Our public outreach has had to pivot. On the top right, you can see us doing a public tour. We have suspended tours of the facility currently, and we are doing some more YouTube and kind of virtual tour videos that are posted to the city's website and the YouTube page. And with changing community use and more people being at home, there have been a lot more issues with these kind of flushable wipes and that kind of flushable materials that are really not flushable because they cause plugging issues in our lift station pumps. And so we've had significant increases in maintenance needs due to that. Next slide, please. I want to briefly touch on some wastewater flows and water quality. On the left side is our a graph showing our effluent flow on a daily average in the green bar, and the blue is a instantaneous peak flow. So in March of 2020, we did have a pretty good rainstorm, and so we had some I&I infiltration and inflow from the collection system flow through the facility. This historically could have been much higher, and the efforts of the collection system to reduce those I&Is is definitely visible as we're not seeing those significant peaks during regular rainstorms these days. On the right side, you can see the total of monthly recycled water that's produced and distributed. Currently, our production is really limited by demand. We produce the amount of water needed to supply the system. So you can see the seasonal variation in March and February, January time periods. That demand is really mostly all of our use in plant because we use recycled water for process use. And then in the summer times, that's when the irrigation really starts to increase. And we're hitting about 1.5 million gallons of recycled water distribution per day in the summer times. Next slide, please. This slide shows some water quality parameters. The new secondary upgrades that were completed in 2019 are really producing a high quality effluent. On the left side, this is showing CBOD. It's a measure of the organic strength of the wastewater when it gets discharged. And so that's showing it as when it comes into the plant in the dark blue, when it goes through our first step of primary treatment in the green, and then the tiny little light blue bar is the effluent numbers. And we're typically in the 98% removal of that organic material. On the right side is a graph showing turbidity. It's really the clarity or the murkiness of the water, and it is also consistently low and meeting all federal guidelines. Next slide, please. I want to take a minute to discuss our NPDES compliance. We have had some permanent violations throughout the year. I mentioned one during the fiscal year 2021. Enterococcus has been the only parameter that we have not been able to meet consistently. We've had one permit exceedance on that in 2021. The other violations have been related to deficient monitoring. City staff are responsible for self-monitoring and reporting our compliance, and we're consistently looking to improve and ensure we're protecting the public health and the environment. The Enterococcus requirement is new. It was added in our revised permit in 2020. We've had intermittent high values through the year, and we'll be reporting a violation for the month of October as well. This is something that we're continuously trying to figure out what's going on. Our one exceedance in fiscal year 2021 was Enterococcus, and the limits it's not based on one sample, it's a calculated value for each month, which does make it hard to kind of pinpoint the source. This monitoring program has evolved over the last year as we've increased sampling frequencies to try to identify our high intermittent values. We're continuously investigating potential causes of these high values. Our first step was to confirm treatment process is operating correctly. After confirming that all our chemical dosing and tanks were operating properly, we started looking for potential sources of contamination. Early on, we identified birds feeding on midge flies that are living in the process tanks as a possible potential source of contamination. And so we started dosing a larvicide into the tanks to reduce the midge flies. This is a bacteria that controls the midge fly populations, and it's something that's used by vector control for mosquitoes abatement. So it is safe for the environment. We also increased housekeeping, tank cleaning, channel cleaning, and we even hired divers to clean our contact chamber while it was in service. We're still seeing intermittent high values, and we're now investigating whether there are interferences in the actual testing and the analysis performed. Working with the lab, we have actually identified that the larvicide that we're using may be a potential source of interference. So we've discontinued that. Luckily, with the seasonal change, the flies aren't as big of an issue. And we're going to continue monitoring and troubleshooting this issue so we can hopefully understand what is causing these intermittent high values. Chair Young, I see you have a question.
I do, thank you. Have you considered taking any of the Enterococcus samples over to the Bren School, where I think Trish Holden can do some genetic testing and determine what the source is for, the particular bacteria strains that are coming through?
We have not gone to the Bren School yet, but we have contacted some of our other contract laboratories. And unfortunately, the tests that we're using, once the test is processed, it takes 24 hours for that test to be completed. And there's hold time requirements for them to actually analyze these tests. So by the time we find out we have a violation, we don't have a valid sample to test anymore. And then the next day we'll grab a sample and they won't be present. So it's this kind of spotty, high spikes. One day it'll be non-detectable, and the next day it'll be above detection, which has been very challenging for troubleshooting.
So why not take a sample directly over to the lab at UCSB? Not wait any time, just have them analyze it for Enterococcus.
We could do that, and the test would be not valid. 300 days of the year, it's less than detectable, and then we have a handful of days each year where we're seeing these high numbers. So there'd be a lot of tests that we're sending to a contract lab that are less than detection.
So, and how high are the levels when they get high?
Right. So our permit is, 90% of the samples are supposed to be less than 110 MPNs per 100 mils, and we analyze up to 2,400. And so we are seeing values greater than 2,400. Now we don't know if that's 2,401 or 24,000, because that's the way the current tests we're using. We are also looking at potentially using different tests. There's different methods available, but this is the only test that our lab is currently certified in performing, one we're using.
And that's despite the fact that the effluent is being disinfected.
Yes, this is after disinfection.
So one of the things, Commissioner Young, I feel like part of the regulations on this kind of rolled out a little premature, and I know the city is probably one of the first ones to get it into their NPDES permits, but there is just, the science isn't quite dialed in to be able to measure this consistently, and yet it's in our permit, we have to abide by it, and yet I think, even when we reach out to regional board staff, they're kind of not sure exactly either. So I do somewhat feel like a guinea pig. We're doing something, and unfortunately it's a violation, but it's really, we're developing something that unfortunately should have been developed before regulations were adopted so that it was a more clear, but certainly you're going to see this coming out of other wastewater treatment plants where, just happen to be the first ones that I think that got put into our NPDES permit with this lower threshold for violation. So more to come on this.
All right, well, it's a concern to me because Enterococcus is more directly related to human pathogenicity than just the E. coli strains of organisms that we monitor. And we know that viruses also are present. We don't monitor for them. And so to me, this is an indication that we still need to dial down on how we treat wastewater and try to get it really as clean as possible. So I understand we're on the cutting edge of this. I understand how treatment processes flow over time, and they're really a very dynamic process. You're dealing with organisms that are changing day to day with the bacteria. But I would encourage us to try to identify where the Enterococcus is coming from, because if it is from birds or some other non-human source, that would be great information. You know, that would eliminate us worrying about other problems and focusing on the ones that are really contributing to the exceedances. So thank you.
I don't know that our permit really defines, you know, Enterococcus. As I'm saying, I wish there would have been more work done ahead of this, because even if we do find that it's birds, which it could be, I don't know that that gives us any relief. We still violated. So anyway, I think more, I guess we'll just appreciate being the guinea pig, but I don't want to alarm the community that we have a problem here. I don't think that this, I think a lot of it is getting the science dialed in, and unfortunately it's in our permit at this point.
My questions are not meant to alarm anybody. I'm just dialing down to a level that I can see what's going on beneath the radar. And, you know, the radar is, you know, what the regulations require, the monitoring requires, but this gives us an opportunity to peer down further to see where we may have some issues that, you know, are just beginning to be identified.
And I do want to stress that at this point, we're also investigating whether the method that we're using is causing some of these high values. So we are, there are multiple methods that are available, but we're currently using only one that our lab is certified in, because the randomness of these high values doesn't correlate with our other water quality parameters like we would expect. We've seen issues with disinfection and seeing pass through of fecal or total coliform, and you can see, oh, there was a interruption in the chlorine system years ago. We're not seeing that. We're seeing this disinfection system running consistently. We're seeing consistent water quality parameters, and we're seeing very low total and fecal coliforms that are not passing through this disinfection system. So I really am hoping that we can figure out what this issue is. And we are working with both our lab and some consultants. Trussell Technologies is helping us with both our tertiary and this disinfection issue as well. Commissioner Kanmeyer, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Walsh. I actually just wanted to let folks know that I unfortunately need to sign off for another meeting, but thanks, Mr. Walsh, for your presentation. Mr. Hagmark, I'm sorry I can't stay for your water manager's report, but I will take a look at those slides. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, I just wanted to ask quickly, do you know if it's a PCR test that we're using for the Enterococcus?
No, we're using, it's an EnteroAlert test. It's a
Okay.
Quantitre where you put these samples in, and the bacteria eat a substrate and you can see it glow, and you get the glowing cells.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those. I'm just thinking that a PCR test today, you know, maybe there isn't one at this moment, but I think that would be the answer to a very fast test that can give us in a few, you know, 15 to 30 minutes, the answer. And eventually that would be the way to do it. I'm not saying that it already exists, but I think that's the way it's going to go. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So the other monitoring issues that or compliance issues we have been related to deficient monitoring. There's a couple different ways this has happened over the last year. Either a sample was collected, the wrong type of sample was collected, the sample was collected but not analyzed, or the sample was collected, it was analyzed, and then the result was found to be invalid or didn't pass a QA/QC. And so if we miss that minimum monitoring frequency due to any one of those reasons, we do report a violation. Some of these were related to short staffing and turnover of staff, but in the lab and in operations. but we have been able to bulk up staffing in the lab. They've hired 3 hourlies recently to supplement their staff, and we've been training and retraining operations and maintenance and lab staff to make sure we can improve this to avoid these deficient monitoring violations in the future. Next slide. Lastly, I'd like to just quickly touch on our biosolids operations. This is another significant cost center for the treatment process, running around $50,000 a month as well. This is one of the few processes where operators have direct control over some of the costs. We're able to change parameters on the belt press. We use a chemical called a polymer to aid in dewatering. And so the way the operators can operate this equipment can create a drier cake, which directly relates to hauling costs. The drier the cake, the less water weight you're hauling off, and you can reduce costs that way. So that's something the operators take great pride in, trying to optimize the belt press operations to control costs. Next slide, please. And as I touched on earlier, all of our biosolids are currently composted. They end up in 2 compost facilities, Liberty Farms in Kern County and Engel and Gray in Santa Maria. The majority is going to Liberty Farms currently. And like we mentioned earlier with regards to the gas production, you can even see this in our biosolids production is that we're producing less solids throughout the pandemic. So in May of 2020 is a really low month. We have a long residence time and holding capacity in the processes here. So it took a little while for after the pandemic closures for the solids to really reduce. But that's everything I have for you. At this time, I'd like to pass this on to Esteban in the collection system on the next slide. Or if there's any questions before.
Yeah, I'm going to do just a time check here. Chair Davis, we've got about 12 slides left, probably about 20 minutes. Would you want us
I'm
to
good
keep
to
going?
stay. You want to, let's check with everybody else. If Commissioner Cooney, Keller could come on, I'm good with keep going.
I have another meeting that I should be at right now, so I'm actually skipping on that because of this. So
I can go to 11. I can go to 11:30.
Okay. So Joshua, let's try to do this in the next 10 minutes, and then we should be able to, quickly get out of here at that particular point, 10 or 15 minutes more.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Mr. Zambrano, you got it?
Got it. 10 minutes. Good morning, Water Commissioners. My name is Esteban Zambrano, acting wastewater collection superintendent.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks to have you. Don't rush. Do what you need to do.
Sorry about that. Okay. I heard 10 minutes. I was just trying to move on. Okay. Next slide, please. Map of the collection system. Surveys are shown in green. Lift stations are shown as red dots. Alistair is shown in orange. The Santa Barbara wastewater collection system is almost entirely gravity fed. We have 257 miles of gravity sewer mains. 90% of the sewer system network is composed of 6 and 8-inch lines. The average acid is 55 years. Having an aging system requires a well thought out preventive maintenance program. The city has 7 lift stations and 2 miles of enforcement. Next slide, please. Performing measures. Limit the number of overflows in the wastewater collection system to no more than 6. 7 SSOs for FY21. Region 3 SSO limits 4 SSOs per 100 miles. The group exceeded the number of allowable sanitary sewer overflows in the collection system due to SSO from rehabilitation material and COVID-19 bites. 500 site inspections of food service establishments for fat, oils, and grease program. 550 site inspections completed. Clean 90% of scheduled pipes prior to due date, pursuant to the assigned cleaning program at the mandated frequency. 71% clean by due date. Due to promotions, injuries, retirements, and COVID-19 impacts, the crew has been short-staffed. resulting in falling behind the target of cleaning 9% of planned cleaning events by the due date. Next slide, please. Look at the past. Here are the spills since 2008. Storm-related spills are shown in green. February 17, 2017, 25-year storm event. SSO caused by severe natural conditions, such as the storm event exceeded a 10-year, 24-hour threshold, are not accounted towards the SSO reduction performance standard. Prior to 2011, the city of Santa Barbara had high numbers of SSOs, an average of 38 spills per year. City hired consultant to assist and update work practice in January 2011. Tunnel keepers filed a court complaint against the city in April 2011. Consent decree into effect in May 2012. The consent decree focused primarily on developing a maintenance management system to improve performance, enhance capital infrastructure rehabilitation, SSO reduction standards for continual improvement, which each year the city had a goal. If the goal was not met, additional funding to the operational budget was required, as well as preparing an SSO reduction action plan, which established a mechanism to modify a management system to achieve SSO reduction. The ultimate goal is to reduce spills and protect the environment. The city negotiated with the channel keepers in 2016, and the consent decree was amended in March 2017. The term was extended until March 31st, 2020. In the years of the consent decree, we have reduced our average spills from 38 spills to 11 spills per year. We have put best management practice in place for managing the sewer system, engineered process designed to reduce spills. Next slide, please. This graph shows SSO events by cause. 4 spills due to other, construction material, wipes, and non-dispersables. 2 spills due to roots, 1 spill due to fog from residential area. Next slide, please. Root-related SSOs from 2012 to 2020. Out of 103 SSOs, 51 SSO events were root-related, about 50%. Root-related SSOs have been trending down over the past 5 years. Increase of total cleaning miles due to 2013 mechanical root control program has been effective. Chemical root control in 2014 has been successful in reducing root-related SSO events. In addition, the new accelerated root control program implemented in 2017 has assisted in reducing root-related SSO events as well. Next slide, please. Debris-related SSOs from 2012 to 2020. Debris, also known as silt. Silt is a fine sand, rock, other fine material deposits in the sewer system. Out of 103 SSOs, 12 SSO events were debris-related, about 12%. Debris control program implemented in 2013 has been effective in reducing debris SSOs. Next slide, please. Fog-related SSOs from 2012 to 2020. Out of 103 SSOs, 10 SSO events were fog-related, about 10%. Fog SSO events have remained low since 2014. The fog program has increased the amount of FSC inspections per year since 2013, which has led to the reduction of grease-related SSO events. Next slide, please. Other related SSOs from 2012 to 2020. Other is defined as broken PVC, rags, wipes, construction material. Anything that is not identified as roots, grease, or debris is noted as other. Out of 103 SSOs out of 103 SSOs, 19 SSO events were other related, about 18%. Next slide, please. COVID-19 impacts. Staff trained for COVID-19 to keep staff members and the public safe. Staff from cleaning. Staff had to adapt to new workflow. 1 staff per vehicle, extra time to disinfect equipment in the workplace, minimum occupancy in the work area, staggered work schedule, team members absent from work due to COVID-19 prevention program. Contractor. Limited support from cleaning contractor due to contractor staffing problems. Competing with other municipalities for contract support. public outreach. Door hangers in neighborhoods with wipes findings and lift stations, or when staff cleaning the sewer main found wipes. Next slide, please. The cleaning program. It is important to know that we have our sewer system using hydraulic. It is important to know that we clean our sewer system using hydraulic flushing, generally 2,000 psi pressure, starting from the downstream manhole to the upstream manhole at roughly 35 feet per minute. Material is trapped in baskets, removed and quantified as clear, light, medium, or heavy. Depending on individual pipes' cleaning findings, the next cleaning date may be adjusted. The cleaning program and frequency is the basis for how all pipes are scheduled for cleaning. Each pipe is assigned a cleaning program and frequency. The graph shows the breakdown of pipes that staff are responsible for maintaining. System-wide cleaning, 36 to 60-month cleaning. Accelerated cleaning program. Based on previous findings, cleaning is accelerated from 60 months to 24 or more frequent to address root debris or fog and refining 16%. Chemical root control. Starting in 2014, pipes are initially treated and then go to 2 year until first reapplication, then can go up to 3 years between applications. Treated with chemical herbicide, product to control root intrusion, that's 11%. Accelerated root control program. The accelerated root control cleaning program was established in 2017. These mains are cleaned at more aggressive intervals until the root intrusion is identified and eliminated, 48%. If a sewer main with a frequency of 24 to 60 months has root findings, that main is moved to a 12-month ARCP. When root intrusion is identified and eliminated, the sewer main is put back to a less frequent cleaning frequency as appropriate or into the chemical root control program. Next slide, please. Equipment and tools. Starting at the upper left corner and moving across. These are machines being used with a jetter truck to access a manhole 250 feet away from the truck. Combination cleaning truck at Las Positas, 101 on-ramp shoulder, cleaning easement. Basket used to quantify findings. Every line cleaned was bagged and labeled with pipe ID, findings, date, and crew. This was the beginning of quantifying findings for the cleaning program. Push camera used to CCTV easement locations. Customized proofer and specialized nozzles to remove roots. Jet scan being used to QA, QC. Operators are able to review the video and location using iPad and Bluetooth technology. Easement machine being transported. Next slide, please. Future of the collection system. Sorry.
I was
Questions?
just gonna say, you got about 2 minutes and I have to cut you. So just to give you a 2-minute warning.
Okay, yeah, I'll run through it real quick. Future of the collection system, staffing up the development and trading. Booker recycle truck, new vector truck, IT pipes, CCTV software, new CCTV equipment, NASCO PACP, rotating staff into different wastewater collection programs, acoustic, manhole inspections, locating point repairs, and lateral spotlighting repairs. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda Flessie for reviewing CIP capital improvement projects. Done. Thank you.
Chair Davis, I think given where we are with time, we can follow back up with you on the capital stuff. You're going to be hearing loud and clear from us all the investments we're making in electrical and Braemar lift station. So with that, I think we can stop here and open it up for questions.
Okay, we're gonna open up for a couple minutes of questions from the commissioners. Anybody with questions? Good, okay, I'm gonna give a closing comment. I'm gonna first ask if there's anyone who wishes to speak for the public. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody wishing to speak on this item?
Chair Davis, we do not have public comment at this time.
Great, okay, I'll just give my thing that I always say. Ms. Flessie, Mr. Welch, and Mr. Zambrano, and the entire wastewater staff, they're unsung heroes. 24/7, 365, everybody basically figures it's all taken care of. Pandemic comes and all these things hit, and it all basically, they just keep pushing and making it happen. What Mr. Zambrano just showed me in terms of his 2-minute drill, great job in basically getting through this under pressure. So really, really good job. And I also just want to go back to say the new treatment plant process diagram, boy, again, I'm going to give big kudos. The previous one was a kind of a flow diagram with arrows, right? Just putting in the icons and you can always all of a sudden see and it tells the story such that even idiots like me can really see what's going on and how the plant works. So really great kudos. Joshua, thank you for the presentation from the staff and pass on our compliments to everybody who presented today because there's a lot of information in that regard. Okay, I'm going to then move real quickly to your water resources management report, and you've got 5 minutes.
All right, so I think I'm just going to jump into, I think the most significant thing here. We're starting our new water year. As we talked about earlier, the city has 25,000 acre feet of water in Kachuma right now. That's just remarkable. It leaves us in such better position going into this year and potentially shortages in the future. So with that, I did want to stop. We had a really good conversation last month about sending a letter to the county concerning the frustrations the Water Commission is also seeing and the county's behavior related to Kachuma, and in particular, the relationship over our allocation request. And I think after further conversation with the chair and vice chair, we've decided maybe that's a conversation that needs to come from the city council. So we're working on that effort, but we're no longer planning to have the Water Commission chair send a letter to the County Board of Supervisors. We're going to revisit that and continue to work that out, but we wanted to close that loop here. And I don't know if Chair Davis, you wanted to say any more on that issue. Otherwise, our next meeting will be in December via Zoom. So new platform. If we need to do some training, we'll reach out to you. At this point, we haven't really practiced on our end, and we'll see how different it is. Everything from Zoom seems to be easy, so hopefully that won't be too much of a change, and we'll just drop right into it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions out of the manager's report, if anyone has any.
Chair Davis, you're muted.
You're muted, sorry.
I'm just flapping my lips. That happens. So, any questions from anybody on the commission, quickly? Okay, I will just comment that I did use the Zoom platform at council on Tuesday, and it was pretty seamless and really easy to do. So FYI. Our next meeting will be December 16th, 2021 at 9 a.m. I will personally be absent. Vice Chair Young will convene and chair that particular meeting. Thank you, Jeff, for doing that. Other than that, I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving because that's coming up next week. We have lots to be thankful for. Everybody have a good day, and we will see you all next month.
Thank you all.